G'day Internet and welcome back to another video. About 12 months or so ago I uploaded this grainy mess of a video and it was on my Raspberry 64. So to celebrate a year on YouTube I wanted to do something a little special and something that kind of harked back to that other video. Now if you watched my last one you'll know that I rebuilt my Amiga 600 and the more steely-eyed of you would have noticed that by the end of it I ended up with a spare case and a keyboard. You can probably see where this is going. Yep, we're going to put a Raspberry Pi into an Amiga 600. We'll start off by looking at some of the case mods that I've already gone and done because you don't really need to watch me sanding and painting for 2 hours. And then we'll get on to the software. So the case mods at this point in time are limited to the ones that I don't need the 3D printing for. And taking into account what I'm hoping how this project will evolve, I've done a few things. So I've covered up the floppy drive LED, which we won't be using, and I've also blocked up the PCMCIA port. This is simply just done with some milliput. The inside of the base here is simply got some Perspex glued in with some super glue as a backing, and then milliput, and it's all been sanded flush. The top case has had a little bit more work done to it than that, primarily around the floppy drive cover. Like I said, we're not using the floppy drive, so I've essentially covered it up so it will hopefully match this side here. All this is several different shaped layers of that same thin Perspex glued in place and then milliput around the edge and sanded for the sake of neatness. So both these parts now are ready for some paint. So that's stage one of the case mods, well stage one and a bit. There's still a few things we're going to have to do once I get a few things 3D printed. But with that kind of sitting to one side now, let's have a look at the software side of it that's going to be running on the Raspberry Pi. What I did is I started off with Amiga, which is a Raspbian distro with UAE for ARM kind of already rolled into it and already set up. However, the problem is I'm not an Amiga person. I didn't grow up with them and I've really only had Amigas for like the last 12 months or so. And even the hard drive and all the WHD load configuration and so forth on this one was actually done by someone else, and it's all a bit of a black magic to me. So I went hunting online and I tried to find a solution, honestly, just to make this a little easier for myself. And I came across a great utility called HSTWB. It's maintained by Heinrich Stengard, and I apologize if I don't pronounce that quite right. And essentially what he's done is he's created some utilities to prep an image, read a rock and roll, which you can then image onto either straight into a UAE emulator, or he even has one which is a Raspbian image. So essentially what he's done is he's taken Amiga plus then added all his utilities to it, and it couldn't be any easier. So let's start by looking at that. To get started, there's a few things we're going to need. One is obviously the SD card for the Raspberry Pi. The other one is a thumb drive. Software-wise, we're going to want to go to the HSTWB installer website. There's the URL, but I'll also stick it in the description. And we want to go to the download page. And if we scroll down a bit, and this actually took me a while to find, there is actually a Raspberry Pi pre-configured image which contains the what you're used to with Amiga with the HSTWB self-install scripts. So we download that zip file and we unzip it and we end up with this. There's our image file which we'll stick onto an SD card, and you also have a series of directories. We've got Kickstart. We've got an OS 3.9 directory, which I'm not going to worry about because I'm using 3.1. There's a user packages directory and a workbench directory. Now you're going to want to copy those to a FAT32 thumb drive, which I've already done. And here we go here. I've also got my WHD load game repository on here, which we'll get to later. In the Kickstart directory, we want our ROM file. I'm using a Kickstart 3.1 Amiga 1200 ROM. The user packages directory is already populated with the scripts that the installer needs, so we can just leave that as is. Now, the Workbench directory, this is where you want to put the ADF files for Workbench. But there's a gotcha. This install script actually checks for legitimate ADF files from various sources. If we have a look here, it supports the Amiga OS 3.9 ISO and the Boing Bag files. It supports Amiga OS 3.1.4 from Hyperion, and it also supports the clone to Amiga Forever 3.1 files. Now, I actually have, I purchased and downloaded legitimate, just the classic Workbench package from Amiga Forever, and it doesn't support those files. I actually had to go and buy clone to Amiga Forever and pull these files out of it. And if we actually have a look at the setup script, you can actually see that it does a hash check against the files to make sure they're legitimate. So with all that on our thumb drive, we can leave that for now. And now we want to put this onto an SD card. Now I tend to use Etcher, and this is really simple. We open up Etcher, we select an image, there's our image file there, we select a drive, and there's my SD card, continue, and we go flash. You get an admin error because this is basically running a Windows script, a command prompt script in the background, and off it goes. Now, as this runs, one of the things it does is it unmounts and mounts the SD card several times. Now, some of the partitions on that SD card are Linux ones, so Windows constantly wants to like format them and do stuff. So whenever you get a pop-up going, do you want to format this or can't read that, just go no or cancel or whatever, and just let Etcher run through. Now, this isn't the fastest process in the world, so we will now skip to the end. And there we go, the SD card is now imaged. So what we want to do now is we want to take the SD card and the thumb drive, and we want to plug it into the Raspberry Pi and boot it up. So when you plug your Raspberry Pi in, this is the first thing you're going to be presented with. Now, the text is kind of small, so I'll run you through it. The first thing is basically asking you if you wish to expand the file system. Like any Raspberry Pi install, this is generally the first thing you do, and you go yes. It'll do that, and it'll ask to reboot. It'll then boot back into Amiben. Now, the next one is that it has checked for the Kickstart ROM, which is good. Now we get to choose our emulator. Now this actually comes with a few different emulators. Now I'm most comfortable with UAE for ARM, so I'm going to select that, which is Chips UAE for ARM for Raspberry Pi 3, because that's what I'm using. This will just set your default emulator to UAE for ARM for Raspberry Pi 3. Yes. Do you want to run build install entries for HSBW installer? Yes. It says none found, but they're there. So we'll just go enter. Now UAE for ARM actually starts. And this is where the nuts and bolts of it is. These are the install scripts from HST. This is just a bit of an intro, so we go next. Workbench file systems are required, yada yada yada, loading wedge-based sync, blah blah blah. Hasn't found the CD image, but it has found my, my Workbench ADF files, which is good, so we go enter. If there's any update patches, which I don't have, it looks for a patch dir, and it will skip that. It then looks for a whole bunch of the directories on the thumb drive. It's found all those. It's found the user packages. Self-install is now ready to start the installation process. This is basically the point of no return. So we go enter. It's found my ADF files and now it's copying them across. Done. Kickstart installation is now complete because it found the ROM file. HSTWB install has completed the workbench and kickstart ROMs. The system will now reboot after 10 seconds. So it does a 10-second. The reason for this, I think, is because if you're running it on regular hardware, you've got drive write times and things like that, which doesn't really apply for the emulator. It then reboots again. Well, actually, the emulator restarts. Now, this is where we get to choose our desktop, basically, which workbench we want to use. Now, I've played around with a few of them and I found the best one to use for my usage is Classic WB P96. So we click on that and it changes it from skip to install. And then we go down and we go start package installation. Do you wish to install? Yes. So it starts installing the Classic WB P96 version of Workbench. Now this bit here, the first time it ran, it took for ages and I'm going, oh no, it's crashed, but it actually just takes a while to install. It then starts going through some add-ons for Classic WB. The first one is the iGame artwork, which I want, so we go install. The next one is, do you want the old look icons? Now I actually kind of like this, so I enable them. Installation is now complete. Hit return. It then goes through and it skips all the other versions of WB that I didn't select. Enter. Now I want the WHD load demos and games, so we click both of them and change them from skip to install and we go start user packages. Do you wish to install? Yes. That's done. Enter. And HST WB installer is complete. Hit enter and it will take 10 seconds again and it will reboot. Now, on the first reboot, you end up with the incredibly low res 4-color, I think it is, desktop. So I think that's the first thing we're going to want to change. But there is a gotcha. If we go into Workbench, Prefs, Screen Mode. Now I found for my uses, the best one I use is the Power High Res Laced. And we go Save. And it all looks fine until I want to reboot the system. And I find I constantly get that intuition error. Now, it does eventually sort itself out, but I found a way of getting around it. If we go to Workbench, and we'll just open up the temp directory because I don't like deleting stuff that I'm not 100% sure on. Go to Devs, Monitors, and get rid of the UAE graphics monitor type. So we'll just dump that into temp. And we'll close these windows. And we'll reboot again. And now it boots nicely into a high-res desktop, which is good. So that's the basics of it set up. But we want to kind of tweak it a little. Now, I did think about just simply setting it up like in a standard Amiga 600, but then I thought, well, wait a minute, I've already got one of those. So let's push it a little harder. If we hit F12, we get into the actual menu of the emulator. And let's tweak a few things. So if we go to CPU, let's just give us a full-blown 040. If we go to chipset, AGA is already set. ROM should be fine. RAM, I'm actually going to crank this up to 4 meg of chip RAM. Now you can't add any more Z2 fast RAM with that set to 4, but you can set Z3 fast RAM. So I'm going to give it like 16 meg. Hard drives and CDs, we can now actually get rid of these entries here. As you can see how they're media USB blah? they're the ones actually off the thumb drive. It's used as part of the installation system. So we can actually get rid of that one, that one, that one, and that one. And that's pretty much about it. If we go back to configurations and now hit save, so it remembers, and we go reset, which reboots the emulator again, and you'll find a lot of those messy directories and stuff are now missing as well, which is nice. So if we go F12 again, and this time we want to quit out of the emulator, which drops us back to Linux. So what I want to do now is I actually want to copy all my WHD load games across. So if we hit 4, we open up Midnight Commander, or you can just type MC. And on the left-hand side, we want to go to Amibian, Amiga Files, HDD, and DH1. This is actually a directory which is then presented to the emulator as a hard drive. And if we go into WHD load and games, it looks very empty. But now if I hit tab, and if we go up a directory and go to media, USB, this is my WHD load directory, which is on the thumb drive. And we have all of these. Now if I simply hold down insert, it will select all of those, and we go F5 to copy and enter. It first does a scan because there's lots of tiny little files, and eventually it copies it all across, and you've got them all on the SD card of the Raspberry Pi. So that's all the files now copied across, and this is actually a really easy way of getting any files, for that matter, into the emulated Amiga. So we now simply hit F10 to get out of Midnight Commander, 3 to get back into the emulator, and once back into Workbench, we can actually go to Data, WHD load, games, and there's all the directories that we just copied across. So now it's just a simple case of going into, I use iGame, so if we go run WHD load iGame, obviously nothing's in there at the moment, but if we go settings, game repositories, and click on the little browse button, volumes, data, WHD load, games, and go OK and add, that then adds it to the game repositories. We can close that. And now we just go scan repositories. And this takes forever. And there's iGame having detected all those new games. And if we simply go searching for one, there's Golden Axe. WHD load starts, and away we go. And as a quick example of copying other files across, if we go into the data directory, you can see I have copied the LHA file for a Doom and a genuine Doom 1 WAD file. So if we extract the LHA file out, extract all, and we're going to put it into here. Off it goes, close U, close that, bring it back up. There's our Doom directory. We're going to stick the WAD file into there. If we go in here, it should now be in here, or it should at least work. And we should be able to load up Doom. We will select a resolution. And now we get to play a bit of Doom on our Amiga. So with the case all kind of prepped and the software done, we'll leave it there for now. This video is already getting a bit long. So in part 2, we'll actually get to the fun bit of bolting it all together and testing it. As you can see, I've already got various bits and pieces ready to go. So I hope to see you in the next video.